Hi, I'm the political geek that is Martin Curtis, and this is Change from the Centre. Now, it's impossible to look and read the news at the moment and not see the names of the former Prince Andrew or Peter Mandelson come up, and for good reason. I think the issues are very, very serious. But what we're not talking about enough, in my opinion, is what it says about our country and what it means for our country. And one of the things I want to do today is to talk about why I think that this case reinforces the need for the UK to have a written constitution. In doing that, I think I'll probably start by talking about what a constitution is and about an unwritten constitution. And I know this is probably teaching granny to suck eggs with some people, but I think it's probably worth doing anyway. So I looked at, the English unwritten constitution. I actually looked for the British unwritten constitution. I found this quote, which is about the English constitution, which I think frames it quite nicely, although it's a bit technical. Constitutional law, as the term is used in England, appears to include all rules which directly or indirectly affect the distribution or the exercise of the sovereign power of the state. Now, it's worth saying that although that does talk about England, I think it's equally relevant for all of the countries and the whole United Kingdom for all sorts of reasons, but not least, although we have differences in our laws, they are broadly similar. But basically speaking, a constitution basically outlines who has power, how that power is exercised, and what limits are placed on that power. And it's the limits that are placed on that power that I think we need to talk about, and about how we deal with miscreants in public life that I think is important. And that's where we come to what I've called the Andy and Mandy affair. Now, the most important part of this is, I think, that the law that they're being investigated for is allegedly for misconduct in public life. Now, the issue with that law, and I'm not a lawyer, so this is basically based on my research and what a lot of the media are saying, is that it's common law, which means it's not laid down that it's a law that has been judge made based on past legal decisions. Now, what that means for us as citizens who Peter Mandelson and the former Prince Andrew have served in the past is that we don't have a single reference point to go to and say, this is what the Constitution says about how you can and can't behave, and be absolutely clear about how their behavior fits into that. And that thing about a primary reference point, I think is quite important. But what is also important, particularly relating to Prince Andrew, is I understand that it is unclear about whether Prince Andrew can be charged in his former capacity, the former Prince Andrew, by the way, in his former capacity as a royal. And there is also uncertainty, slightly less uncertainty, but still uncertainty about whether he can actually be charged in and be found guilty in relation to his role at that time as a trade envoy. Now, that's really, really important. Can you imagine a situation where Prince Andrew goes to court and is found not guilty, not because of a judgment on his conduct, but based on a judgment that actually he can't be tried under in any way because of his former capacity as a royal? I think there would be absolute uproar. I really do. And one of the things we could do within a written constitution is set out not just how we expect elected officials and public servants to behave, but also how our active royals need to behave, and how we can deal with miscreant royals. I think it's really important, and it's equally important. I'm going to reinforce the point and I'll talk about it again later. Is having something that we can look at and say, yes, we get it, because it's laid down and written down just there. I think, it's really important, and it's not just in relation to the Andy and Mandy affair. There's other examples of what I would call miscreants that I think we need to think about, and I'm going to talk about a couple, but there are loads of others. The first one I'm going to come to is Priti Patel. And you might remember this from 2020, that she was a minister, and there were lots and lots of allegations about bullying from a number of her different ministerial offices. And she was investigated by the guy who was at that time the independent advisor on the ministerial code, a guy called Sir Alex Allen. And he did a report. And this is the BBC's reporting, a part of the BBC's reporting of what he said. So the BBC said that he said that she has not consistently met the high standards required by the ministerial code of treating her civil servants with consideration and respect, and cited examples of shouting and swearing. And this next bit is a direct quote. Her approach on occasion has amounted to behaviour that can be described as bullying in terms of the impact felt by individuals. Now, Boris Johnson made a decision to back Priti Patel, which meant basically Priti Patel stayed in office, and Sir Alex Allen felt that he had no choice but to resign. That's the wrong way round, in my view. But irrespective of that, it shouldn't have been Boris Johnson's decision whether she resigned or not. The penalties for ministers who breach the ministerial code should be laid down clearly in a constitution, so that it's not for them to resign or be sacked. It is for the law to remove them from office if necessarily, or mete out some other punishment. And the other example I want to use is from the year before, and unfortunately, but not surprising, also involves Boris Johnson. And that was Boris Johnson's decision to prorogue Parliament in 2020. Now, proroguing is basically suspending Parliament, and he made the decision to prorogue Parliament for 5 weeks. And most people, including me, believe that the reason he did that was to avoid scrutiny of the Brexit bill. Now, through various means, and it wasn't straightforward, but that decision on whether it was legal or not for him to prorogue Parliament eventually ended up in the Supreme Court, and they decided two things. The first one was that it was for them to make a judgment on the proroguing of Parliament, and secondly, that the decision to prorogue was not legal. And in fact, Parliament sat the very next day. Now, again, I would argue that whether or not it is legal for and in what circumstances somebody can prorogue Parliament is not something that should be effectively decided through common law and through what it means through the courts. Although the courts could be involved, it should be laid down in a constitution, in the same way that we should look at the circumstances in which a prime minister can call elections. And there are all sorts of other things around member conduct and councillors and members of Parliament, I have to say, should be laid down in some sort of constitution. It doesn't make sense for members of Parliament to be the judge of the conduct of other members of Parliament. That should be laid down in law too. And I could go on, and I'm only talking about misconduct. There are lots of other things around how our constitution and how our systems of governance are structured that could be and should be in there. And I could talk forever, but I think I've made my point in terms of misconduct, which is that whether somebody is guilty of misconduct or not shouldn't be decided through some common law thing where there's constant interpretation. It should be through a clear constitution, and that we should start demanding that. And I do believe that as we get to a point where people start looking at the need to fix our broken political system, which I believe they will, then I think that the argument should be made that a written constitution should be at the heart of any change that's made. Once again, I appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to watch this. If you disagree with me, tell me why you disagree with me. Tell me why you think that we should have and continue to have an unwritten constitution. Tell me in the comments. That's fine. It'll be interesting to read it. And if I get a chance, and I have so far on everything meaningful that's been posted, I'll comment. If you've liked what I've said, even if you disagree with it, please like this video. Most importantly, can you please also subscribe to the Change from the Centre channel? That helps me, and it means you'll be notified if and when I publish more videos. Once again, I really do appreciate the fact that you've spent and taken your time to watch and listen to what I've said, and I hope it's given you a little bit of food for thought. Thank you very much.